Welcome back to the FreeTruth Show on These Changing Times Radio. I'm your host, Patrick Lynch, in sunny, freezing south coast of England, in the county of Dorset, in the old Kingdom of Wessex. Interestingly enough, recently we found 54 skeletons of Vikings in Dorset. They were headless, and there was 51 heads next door to them in the burial mound. And it turns out that they could tell from the strontium in the teeth that they were from much colder climates. So probably Viking renegade. Apparently the Vikings were, if you paid them money, they'd fight for anybody, including the English. So yeah, there was a lot of history in Dorset here. It's quite a Masonic town, actually. But we're gonna get into some of the secret societies. Are you still with us, Mr. Springmeier?
Yes, I am, Patrick. Thank you.
Yeah. So we're
okay. Secret societies.
Yeah, I mean, people have an image. Can I just ask you? People have an image that secret societies do a lot of good work for charity, and they're all in business, and it's a bit like an old boys club, but quite harmless. Nothing can be further from the truth. It's an interlocking, intrinsically linked network of gangsters that are very old and established and know exactly how the mind of the public work. So where would you begin with the beginnings of Freemasonry, for example, or Rosicrucians? Where would you begin for people who have little understanding of how crucial their role is in all this?
Okay, well, there's so many different places and ways I could approach your question, probably 1,000 different ways, and they would all be equally interesting and beneficial. But the way I'm going to approach it is, I'm going to quote from the official ritual of the 33rd degree of the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. The Scottish Rite is a very important rite of Freemasonry, and they have 32 normal degrees, and then if you are hand-picked, you can continue on to the 33rd degree. And in that 33rd degree, and I quote, they say, the three infamous assassins are law, property, and religion. And then a 33rd degree Freemason named Paul Rosen, he said that once religion is dead, law and property will follow. They will fall to the mercy, and we, that being Freemasonry, shall be able to regenerate society by founding on the corpses of the three assassins of man, Masonic religion, Masonic law, and Masonic property. So what we have seen over the last 200 years is Freemasonry working on assassinating religion. Why? Because if you can control people's spiritual thinking, then you can control how the laws are made, and you can, through that, then control property. So they worked on first controlling religion. And I had a book I came out with in 1991, Be Wise as Serpents, where I went Christian denomination by Christian denomination and showed how a large share of them had been created by Freemasons and controlled by Freemasons. And then I went through Christian higher education, the Christian colleges, and showed how Freemasons were leading a lot of the Christian higher education, and also how they were involved with a lot of other Christian organizations. So where does this fit in with your answer? Well, continuing along this line, one of the things that the Freemasons realized, if they were to discredit Christianity, was they had to take away the public image that the church does benevolence. Because back in the medieval days, if you needed a handout, if you needed assistance, public assistance, you didn't go to the government, but you went to the church. The church was the one that took care of people. So
Right.
they had to change that image. And what I discovered is that there was a concerted Masonic plan to create fraternal organizations that would be somewhat disassociated from Freemasonry, that would do benevolence. And the purpose of this was to take benevolence activities out of the hands of the churches. Then the other purpose behind these fraternal organizations is that the benevolence that they would set themselves to do would oftentimes be self-serving to the agenda of the elite. So, for instance, look at your animal lodges. You have 3 major animal lodges here in the United States: the Elks, the Moose, and the Eagles. And their members are very proud to be known as an eagle. A member of the Order of the Eagles is very proud to be called an eagle. Someone who goes to the Moose Lodge is very proud to be called a moose.
Yes, the
I don't know.
Yes, the Fraternal Order of Eagles, the FOE, FOE.
Yes. Yeah, FOE. What an interesting name. Their first big contribution to the elite was, as part of their activities of social legislation, they were the ones that brought in the Social Security system. They were the ones that were pushing for that, so that when FDR, Roosevelt, signed the Social Security program into effect, he gave the pen that he signed the Social Security Act, he gave it to the FOE, because they were the ones that had. And so there was another fraternal organization that was behind the 9/11 call system coming in. Well, then you might say, well, this is a good thing. What's wrong with 9/11 call system? Because under the 9/11 call system, it allowed the police to have a data system where they were allowed to put in anything they want to about you. You like cornflakes for breakfast? That can be in the 9/11 database, all under the disguise of doing this for your security. Normally, the police were restricted on what kind of information they could have on you. But when they created the 9/11 system, it became just sort of like this virtual you that you were talking about, except it was on the level of the local police. So they created several different lodge systems, Rotary clubs, Kiwanis, and then these different animal lodges, buffaloes and beavers, eagles, mooses, and elks. Personally, myself, I have never been wanted to be known as a beaver or a buffalo. I want to be a human, but hey, whatever. But these people are proud to be known by these animal names, and all these lodges, they very subtly tie back to Freemasonry, but not in a way that you can visibly see. But some of them, when they were started, like the Elks, they borrowed really heavily from Masonic ritual. But then over the years, they've gotten rid of their Masonic rituals, so it's not so obvious. Originally, the Elks had the apron, they had the secret passwords and stuff, but they got rid of it. Now, the Elks, the Elk Club, during World War II, to show how closely they work with the system, when the United States declared war on Germany, the government asked the Elks to raise 45,000 recruits. And the Elks outdid themselves. They gave 97,000 recruits to the government. And they were also out there actively recruiting to get pilots for the American Army Air Corps. So, yeah, they're busy doing these benevolent activities. The FOE, Defoe, the Eagles. They participated in the creation of Boys Town in Omaha, Nebraska, the Girls Ranch near Midland, Texas. Midland, Texas is where our late George Bush calls his hometown. If you read about the S&L scandal that went on, remember the S&L scandal that the Bushes were involved with? That involved the Boys Town and the elite using boys from Boys Town to sexually service themselves. So,
right.
There's a lot. We're talking about little subjects that when you start seeing how they connect with everything else, you start scrambling in a lot of different directions.
So you have Albert Pike.
But on the surface...
Sorry, please continue.
You want to talk about Albert Pike?
Well, it's not strictly the beginning of the Freemasonic system, but or the Illuminati itself. But he's their god, if you like, their major player that they always refer to.
Yes. Yeah, Albert Pike, and he wrote Morals and Dogma.
Yeah.
When you get the 32nd degree, they give you your copy of Morals and Dogma.
Right.
And when you read Morals and Dogma, as you're probably well aware, Patrick, it very clearly tells you who's behind Freemasonry. Lucifer, the power behind the Masonic Lodge. Albert Pike is very clear in Morals and Dogma. He's very clear at talking about the Luciferian energy that's emanating the organization.
Luciferianism.
But again, to give a bigger picture, I don't want to mislead people. We're talking about something that's designed like an onion. There's layer after layer after layer. So you have layers behind the Masonic order. The Illuminati's lays underneath it, and then the Masonic Lodge in itself has created lots of organizations who in turn have created a lot of front organizations. So one of the organizations that the Masonic Lodge created, which I think most people across the board are in favor for, are the Boy Scouts. And when I happen to have gone into a couple different Masonic lodges, I have seen, on their bulletin boards and so forth, how important the Boy Scout activities in their local areas are. Like I say, the Masonic Lodge was very played a major role in the creation of Boy Scouts and also in the leadership. And so you've got front organizations that have organizations behind them and organizations behind him. And it's not until you look at the bigger picture that you start seeing how all of these interlock, how they are all used to create an agenda.
If I could just say,
I want to get something.
If I could just say, actually, it's quite topical because I live about 5 miles from Brownsea Island, and there's a statue of Robert Baden-Powell, the founder of the Scout movement here in England, and that's where he used to take all the chaps to sort of train them, and that's where it began. But there's an interesting symbolism on the statue. I might get onto that another time. So it wasn't far from here.
Well, talk about that.
Well, I mean, to me it was quite vague symbolism. I've not come across it before. I must send you the photo. I don't recall it off the top of my head. But we also had Darwin visiting here. I live in Bournemouth and used to go up and down the coast. Hopefully we'll get to Darwin later and his connection to basically fuel the idea that we're animals, and in my opinion they do that with survival business, etc. If we all think of ourselves as animals, then it'll be a lot easier to depopulate us, mentally. Also,
right.
The guy that wrote Lord of the Rings, Tolkien, lived here towards the end of his life. So, and Robert Louis Stevenson, who wrote Kidnapped and Jekyll and Hyde, about 5 miles away. So it's quite a sort of literary area. Mary Shelley was quite prominent here. her heart is buried in the churchyard.
Wow.
Actually, Mary Shelley's heart, not far from here. So that's interesting.
Wow.
But, yeah, the Boy Scout movement, I wasn't aware of that, actually, but I knew there was some symbolism connected with Robert and Powell. I mean...
You'll notice that once you catch on to it, you start seeing some of the... It's a subtle thing, but as you go through Freemasonry, they have all of these costumes, and they give you all of these. At each level, you're given these awards. If you've sat through a Boy Scout service, and they're giving all of these merit badges, you start seeing that the shadow of its parent organization, Freemasonry. It's interesting. It's a subtle thing. It's a very subtle thing, but the
Sure, right.
the pageantry and the ceremony and getting the badges and then also the paramilitary aspect of it. And I was in Boy Scouts myself, and that was at a time before I was a Christian, before I knew all of this. And hey, for me, it was just a way to learn about camping, to go through and work different things, to improve myself, to have fun with the boys. And that's a lot like these they call them white Masonic organizations. These fraternal orders that are not the heavy duty fraternities, but just the lighter ones like Kiwanis, Rotary, Eagles, Elks. The lighter ones. That some people have called that white Freemasonry because they don't even look like Freemasonry, and the connections to Freemasonry are extremely subtle. But you still see an echo to some degree of the deeper things, and
yeah, we have an odd fellow.
They all work together. They all work together so that I at one point I just had to diagram it out because I realized it wasn't going to make total clear sense just to say it. But what I did is in my Be Wise as Serpents book, I broke down all of their agendas, and then I broke down all of their agendas to things that had to be done to create those agendas. And then all the organizations that would be involved in doing one little piece of that particular program, that sub-program. So it's like a huge puzzle, We've got to build this huge puzzle, and this organization puts this piece in place, this one puts that piece in place. And unless you see the whole puzzle, you don't see that they've contributed anything. In fact, a large share of these members, they join for maybe, like in the FOE, they have a lot of beer and billiards at all of their clubs, their lodges, and maybe you just go to have fun and fellowship with the guys and play billiards and drink beer,
Yeah, but to
I'm
be
not
honest,
trying to imply that everybody knows what they're in bed with.
well, exactly. I mean, to be honest with you, I think it's these people that need to be warned and educated before they join the lodge or even consider it, really, who they may be working for, which is a Luciferian agenda. At some point, I hope to examine the difference between Satanism and Luciferianism. Some people have issues and they like that cleared up. But is it fair to say that Freemasonry was a stem from Rosicrucianism, the Knights Templar, or did they divide out and become a separate sort of entity, if you like, themselves?
Wow. The origins of Freemasonry, that's I don't know how many hundreds of books have been written on that subject and how many different theses. Wow, that's a big subject. Let's see if I can boil that down to a simple answer. You had the Illuminati elite were joining actual Freemason lodges. Back in the Middle Ages, you had your trade guilds, and originally the Masons were what the word implies, or what the word originally meant. These were stonemasons, but the trade guilds of Masons who went around building the cathedrals in Europe, they had been infiltrated, and they were able to, you can go back through Europe and you can look at some of the cathedrals built during the Middle Ages, and you'll see that they're on occult ley lines, that they have occult symbology on the statues. There's a lot of occultism and a lot of secret society stuff done in the cathedrals across Europe built in the Middle Ages, but the Masonic lodges back then actually had Masons that could work. These were people that could use their hands. And then you had these outsiders joining that were using the Masonic lodges as covers. And so these real lodges of real stonemasons were called operative lodges. But that wasn't good enough for the elite. They just wanted their own, where they didn't have to rub shoulders with these blue-collar workers, that they could have their own pure fraternity. So they set up the speculative Freemason lodges in contrast with the operative ones, where everybody that joined these Masonic lodges were now not joining something that had to do with actual carpentry or masonry, but had to do with rituals. And what kind of rituals were these? Well, the rituals were based upon the mystery religions. All the best authorities in Freemasonry, for instance, Manly P. Hall, but there were many others besides him, say that the mystery religions of the ancient world provided the rituals for Freemasonry.
Right.
And it's also involves Kabbalism, which Kabbalism is like one of the pillars of magic, witchcraft. And so Freemasonry has been connected to witchcraft, the mystery religions from the start. And if you look at the British Masonic lodges back in the 1700s, you'll see that their logos have devils on them, cloven-hooved devil men, and things like this. And so all these people that say, well, Freemasonry was created a Christian organization, whoa. What are you doing putting devils on your logo if you're a Christian organization? Don't feed me these lies, because it's not the truth. There was something strange about Freemasonry from its start. And one of the men that I studied very in depth, because originally as a teenager I wanted to emulate his life, Benjamin Franklin, he wrote an autobiography, and the purpose of the autobiography was to give an account of his life that would get people to emulate, to get people to copy him. He wanted to set himself up as a role model. What's interesting about his autobiography is he doesn't mention Freemasonry one time in his autobiography. And yet there's a book by a man named Saxe, who's a high-level Freemason. It was about the Masonic career of, and I got this book, and I studied Benjamin Franklin's Masonic career, and almost every day of his adult life he was going to a Masonic meeting. He was a Masonic leader of several different lodge systems. He was he was the big Masonic mucky-muck of North America. And Freemasonry was a big part of his life. In fact, Soxy says the records show that he never missed a single Masonic meeting his entire life. That's pretty incredible, being a busy man like he was.
Sure.
That means he put Freemasonry at the top of his priority list time-wise. And yet he never mentions it in his autobiography. The point I'm making is that Freemasonry was a Christian organization, and it was such a good thing. Why doesn't he mention it at all in his autobiography? Because it's a secret society, and it wasn't at all what people think it is. That's why he kept it secret.
Sure. So through Thomas Jefferson, a lot of the founding fathers were Freemasons. In fact, you could say that the signing of the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution itself was a kind of ritual itself, the signing of it.
Exactly. The Freemasons created those documents. That's right.
Well,
and Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were both Illuminati.
Thomas Jefferson,
Adams,
exactly. We know that Thomas Jefferson was well into his a great studier of geomancy, the placing of monuments, offsetting the good energy of ley lines, etc., and how they all link up across the planet right back to the Vatican. I mean, that's odd in itself. A strange kind of symmetrical earth science going on there, you know. I spoke to, I'm not sure if you're aware of his works, but I spoke to Michael Tsarian, who's a historian, and he studies the occult, which we know just means hidden, secret knowledge, if you like. And he speaks about how people like Thomas Jefferson talk about how monuments are offset and placed away from ley lines because they don't like the good energy that comes from it. We're digressing a little bit, but I wondered while it's fresh in my mind, could you give us your thoughts on that? Geomancy generally, layout in Washington, etc. I mean, how important is all this geomancy to the Freemasons?
Geographic ley lines are very important to the Illuminati, and the placement of these monuments and when they're placed and the rituals behind it and the ceremonies, they're all very important. A large share of the things that have been constructed in the United States, the cornerstones have been put in place by the Freemasons. Washington was the Washington, D.C., District of Columbia, was designed by a Freemason. Excuse me. And not only was it designed by a Freemason, but it was designed with hundreds of hidden occult images. Absolutely amazing. I mean, once you start seeing the occult symbology, I have never had the time to start trying to record how many of these secret things, but the way the streets are designed, if you look from the sky, make occult patterns. The monuments are American heroes have been occult figures. George Washington, who is known as the father of our country, has a monument. It's called the Washington Monument. And okay, so what did they build as a monument to Washington? An Egyptian obelisk, okay? And then you look at this obelisk from the sky, and it's got this circle around it. So you got a point in a circle, which is a Masonic logo or symbol, and that Masonic symbol, a point in a circle, I was told by a man who had been a 33rd degree Freemason and quit because he became a Christian. He said that represents where the Freemasons bugger boys. That's the little boy's rear end, the point in a circle. I mean, you know, you've heard about the G, right? When you start, when you're an outsider, the Freemasons tell you the G stands for God.
Yeah.
And then as you start progressing up the levels, they tell you it stands for the Gnostic symbol.
Yeah,
but when you get up to the level where you're buggering little boys, they tell you it stands for the generative principle, the procreative, the generative principle. So the symbol, all these Freemasons, they just laugh at this stuff, Oh, there's the symbol of us buggering little boys, and it's set right there in the middle of Washington, D.C. And I'm just listing one thing out of dozens that are there right in public view in Washington, D.C. We're in a cold country, but we want to say in God we trust, but what God are we trusting?
Well,
Pardon me?
Right, naturally, yeah. Is it true that the square and compass represents at the higher levels in meaning the open legs of a man and various other sort of sexual symbology?
Oh, yes, exactly. Oh, yes, it's exactly. As we get up to the higher levels, things turn sexual. Exactly. And that's not my opinion. This is what many witnesses have told me.
Another connected group, which I'm interested in for my Irish side of the family, is the Irish Republican Brotherhood, the IRB. Now, I was on a radio station before I joined these Changing Times radio, and they were very pro-IRB sovereign seal ceremony, and a lot of people were put off by that, and they felt they were being manipulated by a secret society over the airwaves, and that's why I didn't mind leaving either. Now, I've seen a video, which I will get to you, of the turning of the seal ceremony by the Irish Republican Brotherhood, and to me it looked like I was watching a typically Masonic ritual, quite militaristic too, as you say. And we've got a lot of very proud Irish history. We apparently threw out the British and forced them back to the north and forced them to the table and won our independence with a lot of bloodshed, and a lot of suffering. But when I read that, when I see that Michael Collins, the leader of the Irish Republican Army at the time, was a member of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which is not unusual in those days. Everybody seemed to be in some secret society or something in Ireland. The Hibernians, the ancient order of the Hibernians, etc. And also when I read that Michael Collins, the leader of the movement for independence, was actually a clerk. It worked as a clerk in London for Morgan Associates for 10 years. You have to look at even your greatest heroes and doubt whether it was a genuine grassroots movement.
Okay, well, let's address that, because I think what we're touching on here is I'm going to look at the bigger picture for a moment, because I think it's instructive to us. What so oftentimes happens in life is we're traumatized, and then through that trauma, the enemy feeds us a lie. Now, the Irish people were traumatized. The English rule over the Irish, there's no way to describe it except just simply it was very brutally abusive. And of course, who wouldn't, if you were a patriotic Irishman, want freedom from that, So from that trauma that the English gave to the Irish people arose a desire for freedom. And so the Fenians, founded in 1857, they rise up, and you see the Irish Republican Brotherhood coming along, and closely related to the Fenians, sometimes considered the equivalent. You see that organization joining Karl Marx's International. In other words, they joined the Communist Revolution in 1865. So then a little bit like, maybe what I might make an analogy, the guy gets drunk, and then in the morning he wakes up and oh, look who I just slept with, You have to wonder if these people know who they're sleeping with, if they knew ahead of time what they were joining or what, but the movement joined the Communist International Revolution, which was being funded and led by the Illuminati. So unfortunately, a lot of us that have really patriotic motivations, we want liberty, we want freedom, and we try to organize, and then what happens is the big boys co-opt our revolution. The big boys come in, and before we know it, we've slept with somebody that we didn't want to, So you see that the Irish Republican Brotherhood made connections, just like the Irish Republican Army has gotten in bed with Al-Qaeda and all kinds of organizations and worked closely with them. So yes, you're going to start seeing all kinds of connections. The Clan na Gael represented the Irish Republican Brotherhood when there were negotiations with Germany back in 1921. And you start looking at the Clan na Gael, you'll start seeing that it's got all kinds of connections to these secret societies and stuff, because it was the amalgamation of a whole bunch of secret societies, occult secret societies. They amalgamated them all so that by about 1873 they had combined all of these different groups. So you're looking at a lot of under the banner of freedom and so forth like this, we've now gotten ourselves involved with a lot of secret society stuff. But when it comes to the actual watching the turning of the seal ceremony, I've never seen that, and maybe you can enlighten me. You were saying that it was Masonic-like. It's not just like where they read something like we believe in freedom or something. What's involved with that turning of the seal ceremony?
Well, going from memory, it involved literally turning the seal to certain points on the compass, which represented the moon or the stars, and which it just seems like a cover story. And it's lots of various spells, if you like, or statements are read out in a very kind of militaristic, army-like fashion.
And that's the way a lot of our lives are, is we have symbols, and no matter which country you live in, you have national symbols. Here in America, we have, for instance, Uncle Sam. He represents the United States. You have your set of symbols. The Irish have had the harp as the symbol. What's interesting is you look at the Irish harp, and the different various numbers of strings on the harp represent different things.
Yes, that was important.
Like on the money, it's 14.
Yeah, that was important.
So where do you separate? Yeah. So where do you separate just somebody using a symbol in an innocuous way where it's not meant for any evil intentions, and where does this slide into something that would be something we wouldn't want to be involved in? That's a good question. People work off of symbols and logos, and the American flag is the symbol. Is that bad or good? Well, I guess that's open for debate. And as far as the turning of the seal ceremony, that'd be interesting to see what that's like. Again, is it something that has an occult significance behind it? That I wouldn't know offhand. But I tend to, in my life, try to steer clear of a lot of the symbolism, because I tend to find out that underneath it all, somebody's got some weird occult significance behind it. and then I get turned off when I find out that there's an occult meaning behind it. The American flag, for instance, I discovered that the American flag was originally not the American flag. It blew me away. It was the British East India Company's flag. And why you would make the flag of your supposed enemy your national flag shows that we're not being told the whole story about history. That's like the British when they win World War II adopting Hitler's flag. You know? I mean, what?
Right.
Say what?
Which is in itself a good luck symbol in ancient Egypt. And so it's just seems throughout history they corrupt symbols that originally had good intentions or innocent intentions. They seem to sort of have an inverted pentagram or an inverted swastika. Yeah, you adopt the tools of the people you've defeated, I suppose, as a kind of a feather in the cap. I'm not sure how that works. But we now come to people like the Fabian Society. Gordon Brown, our ex-Prime Minister, unelected. Fabian Society, I think H.G. Wells was, if I'm not mistaken. That seems to be a very...
Yes, you're correct.
Communistic kind of left style society. Again, ultra secret, etc. We have common purpose here in England and across Europe too, which is another whole show in itself. Common purpose, find leaders and select for the future, very young. We've always done that, it seems. And then you have the big daddy, Royal Institute of International Affairs, which sets policy for the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission. And you also have the Club of Rome, which is a big think tank. These think tanks are intricately linked with secret societies, but what can you tell us about the Royal Institute of International Affairs? We know that it was set up by the bankers about 100 years ago. We mentioned the Milner Group earlier on, touched on them briefly. Lord Rothschild, Alfred Milner, the Rhodes Society all sort of merged, and we've got the Rhodes Scholars, etc. But from my investigations, it seems all Gold College and a role in setting up the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which is in itself about 50 yards, or about 100 yards away from the Buckingham, for a stone's throw, literally, from Buckingham Palace. I've been there, knocked on their door. It's actually a Masonic blue colour, sky blue door with a lion's knocker, and the whole shebang. What can you tell us about the Royal Institute of International Affairs, Mr. Springmeier?
It is involved in the policy process. You have different levels and different components of the policy process, and Royal Institute of International Affairs has its American counterpart, which are policy planning groups like the Council of Foreign Relations here, and you also have a Trilateral Commission, the Brookings Institute, American Enterprise Institute. You have a whole gamut of policy planning groups, but they're one of the more important ones, and they carry out several functions. And like you say, they were funded and started by the big boys, the powers that be, and their membership is of that elite group too. And they interact with the groups that have the resources, and they interact with the research and policy planning groups, so that what they're basically, how they're functioning is they're like a steering committee. You know, they're steering things, and they're coming together as wise men and in the mechanism of policy process, they're like the steering wheel. That's putting all of these think tanks and foundations and banks and corporations and legislative committees. They're kind of working that all together through their steering work. That, I guess that's in short where they fit in, and as far as on a level, that's a pretty that's an intermediate level within the ranking of the Illuminati. So you see somebody on the council in the CFR or these other groups. They're at an intermediate level of power within the Illuminati. That doesn't mean that they don't operate at other levels too, but it shows you that the person's is a significant figure.
I mean, when you go to their website, the Chatham House website, they're literally talking like
Yes.
there's no government. It's like they're discussing policy, and this is what we're gonna do with the world next. And we've been working on rations
Right.
and food rights for 15 years now. This is what's
Right.
coming. And global governance is what we do, and to hell with you, you know.
Right, and the very name that the informal name Chatham House, that is referring to the Astors' huge mansion there. The Astors being an Illuminati family that I write about in the Bloodlines of the Illuminati.
Yes.
It's not by accident that it's at Chatham House, that they've held it at Chatham House, and that it's known by the name Chatham House. To put the Royal Institute of International Affairs, to put it in perspective, it is an Illuminati front organization that carries out the steering for the policy process.
Okay, we've only really briefly touched on some of the secret societies and how they interlock. We've spoken about how major conflicts have been thrown onto the world stage at the whim of these bankers, it seems. But above the very top levels of the pyramid, you have your technocrats like Kissinger, pedophile, Brzezinski, various other top-ranking public figures. Now, the people who are at the very top of the pyramid, they're not in the public eye at all, are they? You won't see them on television or radio. I've heard them referred as the little fat men, the lazy boys, and you mentioned in one of your talks that they even have actual messengers that feed information back and forth by word of mouth and travel the globe. I guess these are the characters you don't see on television. From your estimations, and it may be obviously very difficult for anyone to find out, but what's your sense of who these people are at the very top? They're not just bankers, are they?
No, they're not just bankers. Each family of the major families has their own hierarchy. The control is really diffused. It's not like there's one person running the show. It's like in Europe, you've had a council of 300, a committee of 300. It's known by committee of 300 or group X or whatever. there's been different names for this group of 300 wise men. My point being is that the power is diffused amongst them, and it's not just one person coming up with his idea of what's going to be. As far as the people above the people we see, yeah, some of them are outside of the public eye. That's true. And then there's another way of looking at it too. Where's the best place to hide a secret? Out in open. So actually, some of the very powerful people actually are in the public eye, and so it's not always a clear-cut thing that if they're powerful, they're outside of the public eye. Some of the powerful men in the world are known publicly, so it's kind of a mixed bag there. Okay. Nobody is running the show by themselves. That's what I'm trying to say. Okay. It's a group effort. When you join the Illuminati, you join a group, and you're carried along with the ideals or the agenda of the group.
Absolutely, absolutely. I was hoping for a couple of names there, but perhaps another time. Let's get to, I mean, we talked about how major wars are funded and how financial systems are set up and destroyed at their whim, if you like, and how they control generations over the centuries of countries, and how they're actually internationalists with an international sort of global mindset rather than countries. And the setting up of countries was just a useful tool to divide and conquer, if you like. But we're going to have a look at your book, the Bloodlines of the Illuminati, and you specifically talk about 13 families. Now, alphabetically, we might start with the Astor family, which you've paid reference to there. It mentions here, and I quote, the original founder of the Astor fortune was John Jacob Astor, 1763 to 1884. John Jacob Astor was born in Waldorf, Duchy of Baden, Germany, from a Jewish bloodline. Jewish origins have been hidden, and quite a number of various ideas of the Astor's heritage have been put into circulation by the Astor's John Jacob Astor, the butcher. In 1784, he came to America after a stopover in London, England. So what can you tell us about this Astor Illuminati bloodline?
I think that the Astors are a very interesting way to show people how the Illuminati work. Here we have a man, he was helping in the butcher shop there in Waldorf. He was a nobody. And then strange things happen. You start looking at his life, and somehow historians never seem to ask the right questions. But he goes to England. Obviously, he does something there in England before he heads to America. Certain people have said that while he was in England after he left Germany, he was coordinating with British intelligence because the American Revolution was going on. At any rate, he comes to America. His brother is given a monopoly in New York City to sell meat, to sell beef to the British Army that's occupying New York City during the American Revolution. The British Army, by the way, had lost New York City for a short time, but then they came back in and defeated Washington's army in a big way, and then occupied New York City for whatever that was worth. So New York City, which was, by the way, tended to be pro-British during the war anyway, was controlled by the British for most of the American Revolution and given over to the Americans after the British surrendered. But the monopoly there was given to his brother. And so that shows you that there's something more to the story. And then what's really bizarre is you would think that would raise people's eyebrows, and that they would suspect John Jacob Astor's patriotism, considering that his brother was in so tight with the enemy, right? But it doesn't seem to raise any suspicions. And so in the next war that the Americans get into, in the War of 1812 with the British, why Jefferson and one of his secretaries, a man named Gallatin, they give him special privilege to deal with the British during the war, and you see this kind of stuff so often in history, is that throughout these wars, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, blah, 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 and then in this case, the War of 1812, special people are given the exemptions, the privilege to trade with the enemy. All the other American trading companies went broke during the War of 1812, and Astor's getting rich. And you have to ask yourself why. What was it? Did he have a real special personality? Well, he could barely speak English correctly. When he spoke, he had such a German accent, it sounded like he had marbles in his mouth. And his manners were atrocious. He was self-centered. He was, one famous time, he was sitting at a nice meal, and his hands and face were dirty, so he just reached over and grabbed the shirt of the guy next door to him and wiped himself on the guy's shirt, you know. The guy next door to him used his white shirt as his table linen.
Well, he's offended all the major rules of etiquette in England there. Oh.
So he was crude.
Yeah.
He was crude. He was a crude man. He didn't have a pleasant personality, and yet he rose to become, from being almost a penniless immigrant when he first came over, to being the wealthiest man in America. And constantly, time after time, he got privilege from the big boys to do what he did. He was given a green light. He was given permission to do this, to do that. And so the point I'm making is these people that become multimillionaires, it's what family you're born into. It's not that you have all of this talent, or George Bush didn't become our previous president because he was the best man for the job. He got it because of what family he belonged to.
Exactly. Same with Bill Gates or Richard Branson, probably, Bill Gates, etc. And as I say, they're hiding under the guise of helping people now with vaccines to reduce the population. That's what Bill Gates says. Yeah, if we do a really good job on vaccinations, we can reduce the world's population by this much and that percentage. Oh, lovely, cheers. So, I mean, I don't think these guys ever really make their own money. That's a big con, and it adds to the American dream, rags to riches. Anyone can get there. So that's poppycock, as they say.
Yeah, it really is. And you look at someone like John Jacob Astor the First. If I'm recalling the statistic is in my Bloodlines book. I'm not looking at the statistic, but I think it was in his rental apartments, 50% of the children died before they got 20 years old. I mean, atrocious. The man, the way he treated the people, you would think that somebody that went from rags to riches would have some kind of sympathy for poor people because he had supposedly been poor himself. He had a satanic brutality to him that was just incredible. And then as his descendants, became wealthier and wealthier, eventually they became wealthy enough that they became British royalty. They moved from America back to Britain. Or I say back, they never were in Britain. They moved from America to Britain. And so you got these people from us. And now they're your barons and stuff. Now you can have them as aristocrats.
Nothing's really changed or altered today. I mean, Peter Mandelson, aptly named the Prince of Darkness here in England, has always been a Rothschild agent, and he boasted that he was running England from a Rothschild swimming pool in France. I mean, come on.
Yeah, the Rothschilds are another example of a family that at one point were nothing as far as the world knew. They were in Frankfurt, and then they became barons and baronesses and blah blah blah. We got all the titles that they needed, and you've got them there. They're now lords over there. You guys have made them lords and sirs and whatnot. And
well, I do have an interesting Rothschild story of my own you may be interested in. I was saving it for the show, Mr. Springmeier.
Well, yes, please.
I live in the south coast of England. There's a new forest area where Nelson's boats were all built from the wood there and everything. It's a massive expanse of woodland and natural areas, ponies running around and deer. It's very beautiful, and you can go to one garden called Exbury Gardens, and it's a rhododendron hive, if you like, if you forgive the pun. And it was owned by one of the bankers, one of the Rothschilds' banking family, and is still owned today by David Lionel de Rothschild. Just before I go on, I wondered if you had any information on him, David Lionel de Rothschild. He's Lionel's brother. Sorry, Evelyn's brother.
Yeah, he was one of the leaders in the family. There's been a number of them by that name. So sometimes when you come across these names, you have to do a genealogical search.
Yeah.
Which one are we talking about? It's like John Jacob Astor,
Yeah.
I don't know, there's been about 10, 15 of them.
Well, this one's about 60, perhaps 65 now. Anyway.
Yeah, he was one of the family leaders.
Well, apparently he was a horticulturalist and a writer now. And I went to see his house, and I was looking at some of the symbolism on the wall. We had the 5 arrows of Rothschild, representing each son going to a major country.
Right.
And you also have these 2 dogs, statues of dogs outside. And when I turned to my right, I could see this old man pottering around in his garden with a couple of dogs who looked very similar to the statues. I think he was removing bramble with his secateurs, and I couldn't quite believe my luck. And luckily, I put my camera on in my pocket, video camera, and started recording and walked up and said, "Oh, hello, Mr. Rothschild." He said, "Yes." I said, "Oh, hello, I'm Patrick Lynch from These Changing Times Radio," which he didn't hear. "This is your garden, I see. I'm a bit of a rhododendron buff myself. Oh, I see you have rhododendron Thompsonii there, a good specimen." And we talked about gardening, and he was telling me he lives mainly in London but spends the weekends here, etc. Just as a big chemtrail was being sprayed over his house too. And he said, do you mind if I take a picture? He said, and the dogs started they were the same dogs from the door, you see. Had statues of his own dogs on the front of his house. And I said, I do have one question for you though, Mr. Rothschild. Why do you think we need a one-world government, a scientific dictatorship? And he looked a little bit surprised all of a sudden and said, I wasn't aware that we do. And I said, you're not aware that you do, right? So why do your family have, what are your family's eugenics views? Well, I wasn't aware that we did have eugenics views. He said, and then he started, and I didn't even say the name. I didn't even start talking about aliens. I didn't bring up aliens. I didn't mention David Icke or anything. And the first thing he said was, you're obviously one of those conspiracy nuts. And who was the name? What was the name of that chap? What was the name of that chap that wrote the most astonishing nonsense about my family being from another planet or something? Now, what was his name? He was asking me. He wanted me to say his name. David Icke, David Icke, David Icke. I said, I don't do aliens, sorry. It was a cheap trick, and I was a bit disappointed, to be honest, given their understanding of human nature and psychology. I said, I don't do aliens. I only deal in facts, hard banking facts. He said, well, give me some facts then. I said, another question. Oh, yeah, okay. Do you think the financial crisis was engineered by the big banking families of Europe? And he kind of scuttled back into his flower border and sort of evaded the question. I said, what is a new world order? What does it mean? He said, this is stuff, and he actually said, this is stuff right out of the Victorian era. People have moved on since then. And I said, have they? Have they really? I said, well, you own the governments. Your family runs the English government. You decide who gets in and who doesn't. Nonsense, nonsense, nonsense. And by that time, I thought some security might be turning up or something, so I started to make my way off. And as I was leaving, I said, you're not going to get your new world order, Mr. Rothschild. I'm not your slave. And it was quite funny, and it was actually quite funny, because the last thing he said was, well, thank God you're not my slave. I couldn't think of anything worse than somebody like you tagging along. So there we are. That was my encounter with Herr Rothschild. And you say the current one is about 65, maybe 70 years old. The current David Lionel de Rothschild, he was working with the banking sort of side of the family, or did he have little to do with it? Do you know?
I don't have that all sorted out.
Oh,
I really don't. You know, I remember that there was a Lionel Rothschild who was involved with the Balfour Declaration back there in the creation of Israel. And then recently there was like I say, there was a Lionel de Rothschild that was very active, that he was getting his name in the papers. I was reading about him in the newspaper articles, but I don't have it all sorted out in my mind. Like I say, there's so many of them with similar names that when I was writing that article that went into the Bloodlines book on the Rothschilds, I had to sit down with genealogy charts and painstakingly sort out all these people, because it was like, it was you kept coming across the same name, you know, and he was a lord, right? The one that you were talking to was a Lord Rothschild?
not as far as I'm aware, no.
Oh, okay. Was he from France? Isn't there a Lionel de Rothschild that lives in France too?
He had a perfect Etonian accent. There are no pictures of him on the internet. I couldn't find one picture of the internet. As far as I know, my video may be the only sort of reference to what he looks like. So I'll get the video to you.
Yeah, that's true.
He did say he was.
Yeah, that's interesting. The way
he did say that he was the brother of Evelyn, de Rothschild.
Okay, he was from Edmund de Rothschild?
Yes, Edmund was the father.
So what you're looking at there, again, how confusing it gets, because you're looking at the French branch of the Rothschild family moving to England, and instead of just simply staying in France, they've moved to England. So you're getting these different branches interweaving themselves. Reminds me of some when I've gone out and trimmed prune trees. Some of these trees, the branches just start growing all into each other. Yeah, I'm not very helpful there, and
that's all right. We'll come back. If we could come back to the Rothschilds, I mean, we were talking about the Astors. The main chap one of the main chaps on CNN News, I forget his actual name now, Anderson Cooper, he's an heir to the Astor fortune.
Cooper.
In 1919, I'm quoting from yourself, the Royal Institute of International Affairs was created, and the Astors were the major financial backers of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, which functions as the 4 degrees cover of the Illuminati. So the Astors were well in with Cecil Rhodes and Milner and Lord Rothschild then.
They were exactly. And while we're on the family, I one of the people that I used in the Bloodlines book as an example, it was Vincent Astor. I think that was on page like 25. I give a whole long list of 41 different organizations that he was director of, like American Express Company, the Atlantic Fruit and Sugar Company, Chase Manhattan Bank. The point I'm making is when we want to understand the power that's making all the decisions, we start seeing these interlocking corporate directorates. So you have someone maybe sitting on 20 different corporate boards. I don't know how they have time to go to all these meetings and make all these decisions myself, but it's just, you would think, with 40 companies and maybe 15 people on each board of directors, you're dealing with 15 times 40 people. No, the same people are often showing up at different board meetings. So there's interlocking directorates of these elite, and they're all one big elite insiders club, so to speak. They're all they're taking off and going to places like here in this country, to the Bohemian Grove, or some of these other places that they go to, go down to the Renaissance thing in South Carolina. They have their little meetings, some of them are going to fly off to the Bilderbergers meetings, but they're an inside group, and they're not as large as one might think. That was one thing that I like to use the Astors for. Another thing that I think is helpful for us is the different members of the Astor family that would travel to the USSR and just be warmly welcomed. Like I showed a picture in the Bloodlines book of Michael Astor going to the USSR when Gorbachev was running it, before perestroika and the wall had come down and everything. And Michael is treated, they roll out basic, as I was saying, the red carpet for these people. And, typically the communism is supposed to be against these big capitalists. That's supposed to be their arch enemy.
Well, Marx said himself that there'll be 70 years of kind of Soviet culture and then dictatorship, and then the West and the East will sort of merge into not quite communism, not quite fascism, and considering that the elite Illuminati banker trolls themselves invented both paradigms, if you like, that's no surprise.
Yeah, exactly. You said it so well there.
Well, also, you were talking about the Astors. I mean, there are 12 other families that I hope we can get to.
Okay.
The Bundys are the next kind of chaps that I wanted to discuss with you.
Okay.
The Bundy bloodline. You mentioned here your research and knowledge is limited, so much more work can be done to uncover the evil works of darkness that collaborate to destroy the Christian faith. The Jekyll and Hydes that ravage our land. The serial killer Ted Bundy.
I think Ted Bundy is an example from that bloodline that's worthy to. What I'm doing is I'm picking out as we're going along examples from these families that I think is instructive to the listeners. Ted Bundy, he was adopted into an elite family. His mother worked for the Rockefeller's Council of Churches, and a lot of these Illuminati kids, they're adopted out. They tried to hide the lineage. They're under mind control. He was a program multiple. He was actually a multiple personality, and he terrorized our country. And that's what people need to understand too is that not everybody in the Illuminati is a kingpin. We also have people that are just people like Ted Bundy who are playing a different role, except he happened to be a very powerful political figure in Washington, in the state of Washington that's north of here. He actually was in charge. I'm trying to remember what he was in charge with. I think he was in something like a department that was to protect women from rape or something. I'm forgetting, but it was a place where the wolf was guarding the chickens. Anyway, he was from a somewhat of a significant family, and all of his connections, all the fact that he was a program multiple, all of this has just been covered up. All these significant clues that would help us understand what he was all about are just covered up. It's not that they're impossible to find out these details, but you have to really, really scratch below the surface to find the details. And then I was finding out that if it was just bizarre. I would try to do research, and it was amazing how the libraries would just cover stuff up, the kind of materials that were being allowed into the libraries. For me as a researcher, the pattern of what disappeared was to me rather obvious. So there's an example of somebody who got into the public eye, and without us understanding the mind control and the rest of the story, we really don't understand what Ted Bundy was all about. Another Bundy that's worthy of bringing into view is George Bundy. And I mentioned him in the Bloodlines book because here is a man, and I can't even remember offhand all of the things he jumped from, but he starts out in one significant place in the government, and the next thing you know, he's given another incredible job. And you'll see this with these people. You go, Well, how could he be qualified to do that and then turn around and be promoted to run another department of the government? And then, how does somebody go from being like, let's say, Secretary of the Commerce to the Secretary of War or something, I mean, what makes him qualified to jump from one thing to the other? And he happened to be a fraternal brother of George Bush. He came from the Order of the Skull and Bones, which you look at the people in the Order of the Skull and Bones, and a lot of times they end up in exceptionally powerful positions, and you just scratch your head and you just say, what? How'd they get there?
Right.
So you probably see that all the time over there in England, because the same phenomenon's happening over there,
Yeah, exactly. I mean, one minute they're a minister of this, and the next they're a minister of that, and chop and change all the time.
Right, and then look at your general. It's like in World War I and World War II, and I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but all of a sudden you see somebody, he's a general, and you just scratch your head. Why is he a general? What's his qualifications? And some of the foreign troops, like the Australians and the South African troops that had to serve under some of your generals, got tired of it very quickly because these guys were sadistic. They just enjoyed people dying.
Perhaps
they weren't qualified to be generals.
I think that's all the qualification you need just to be a complete psychopath. Perhaps that's all the qualification you need, and as long as you perhaps obey more than the others or something,
Right.
There's the Collins family as well. You talk about the Collins.
Okay, let's
family.
talk about the Collins.
That's the next one in the alphabet there.
I started working. I started working with 4 women that had been teamed in the Illuminati together, and they were from different bloodlines. One of the 4 women was from the Rothschild bloodline. One of them was from the Van Dyne bloodline.
Yes.
And this is the first time I've actually laid it out like this. And one of them was from the Collins bloodline. And so that gave me an introduction to the Collins bloodline. The Collins bloodline goes back to the old country rituals, the Druidic rituals. And the Collins family originally came over to New England under the disguise of the Puritan movement. There were a number of satanic families that came over calling themselves Puritans, and later broke off a bunch of Puritan churches that eventually became known as Unitarian churches. The Collins family created the Unitarian churches, and so the Collins family has been very powerful in the spiritual side of the Illuminati because, as you're well aware, the Irish, the Celtic side of humanity has always been deeply engaged in the spiritual side of things.
Exactly. I was going to ask about the origins of Druidism, but what I wanted to know was apparently they wiped out as many of the Druids' culture as they could, a bit like the Jedi were wiped out in Star Wars, to obtain their knowledge. And it took them 1,000 years or so to absorb and to make sense of this knowledge, which was originally for the good of mankind. And that's what the struggle was. I mean, the Druids went to North America, they traveled a lot, they were a seafaring race of people, highly advanced culture, and they wiped them out and took their knowledge.
So
is that what you've put together from your work?
I'm sure there was some of that. There's an interesting connection to Ireland, and some of these research projects are ongoing. I don't think I'll ever finish them in my lifetime. But the Ethiopia is another country of ancient wisdom. And what's really fascinating is in the ancient world, Ethiopia was the center of spirituality, and there was a very close connection between Ethiopia and Ireland. And so it's not by accident that Ireland has had a long history of spirituality. So the Collins family, coming from that background and acquiring this magical spiritual power, has been one of the leading spiritual bloodlines within the Illuminati. Very powerful. I gave a description of one of the rituals where one of the Collins women is on a throne. This throne was described in detail to me when an eyewitness was describing it to me, and interestingly, the throne that she sat on, I actually saw pictures from the Middle Ages of late Middle Ages of thrones that didn't look that dissimilar to the throne that she was on, leading me to believe that her throne actually was probably an ancient piece of furniture. Let's see. Another interesting thing about the Collins family was that it had a number of offshoots, and that's another thing about the bloodlines that I want to bring out, is that most of the people that belong to these bloodlines don't have the last name of the bloodline. They have other last names. And so thanks to being pointed in the right direction, I learned that General Earl Grant Wheeler, who was in charge of the American military in the Vietnam War, and General Grant, who was the Major General for the United States, the federal forces in the Civil War, were related to the Collins. And so that opened up a whole area of learning there for me. The Collins family has tended to be behind the scenes because, like I say, their area of activity, which has been in the military, which has been in spiritual things, hasn't gotten the attention like the Rothschild family, which has been in banking, or the Rockefellers, which have been in oil. Some of the, and that brings out another feature about these bloodlines, is they tend to have been given a certain realm of activity, a certain domain to thrive in. So you'll see that they tend to be their activities tend to be in tend to be clustered in certain areas of human endeavor. It doesn't mean that some of the members of a particular bloodline might not branch off into other things, but they sort of specialize. These families sort of specialize, like the DuPonts, which is the next family in line. They have specialized in